Welcome to another episode of the Zealous Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder, and this week I've got Tracy Axel in the house. She'll be my guest from USA Surfing. She is the Director of High Performance. We're going to talk about what it was like to go to the Olympics in Japan in 21, how she works with those athletes in USA Surfing, the Olympians and those that are hopeful, and a whole lot more. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder, and away we go. We could talk, obviously, all about surfing, yeah. Which I would totally dig surfing. I would love to get your experience at the 21 Olympics with John, and Carissa, and Mr. Marks and the rest of them and all that. That'd be great. But were you over in Haleiwa for John's win last weekend?
Not this recent event. No, I was actually on the East Coast. I was visiting family. So I'm originally from Maryland. So from suburbia in a small beach town called Ocean City, Maryland. And
I know Ocean City, Maryland.
Yeah, so that is my hometown beach. I was lucky to get one really good, fun, cold surf while I was there.
Me too. I was in New Hampshire at the beginning of November, and I scored. Have you ever gone up and surfed New England?
Not New England, no, just New York as far as I've been.
That's far enough. Yeah, I grew up outside of Boston, went to school back there, and then moved out. I followed some friends out here about 30 plus years ago now. I think it'll be 31 years next month, but I still keep a board with my family that live on the coast of New Hampshire, which of course it's like 18 miles of coastline. There's only 4, maybe 5 towns that make up New Hampshire, but there's this one beach break that is within walking distance from where my mom lives. And I had that all to myself one Friday it was like waist high, peelers left and right. And the thing about that, it's always offshore. I couldn't get over it. Nobody paddled out. And it was like temperature of Santa Cruz. It was about 53, 54 degrees. So I felt right at home. But the strangest thing, nobody paddled out. I thought, well, did I miss a sign at the beach saying it's shark warning or something,
Right, totally.
But I've never surfed Ocean City. What's that like?
It's been barreling beach breaks. So we are ones to chase hurricane season. I've been lucky to score a couple hurricanes in the tail end of summer, start of fall. It must have been right after the Olympics, actually. I went home for about 3.5 weeks, and there was it was like Henry and Larry were like back to back. And I keep just like a 5'5" like catch surf skipper. And the surf community is still growing. It is very small. We have some rising talent that's coming out, even that's on our junior development team. And I think the pure stoke that comes from growing up on the East Coast is that we're not used to the consistency of waves as much as that. Like it'll be flat for days, or that'll just be a little bit of a corner here and there. But like when the waves turn on, I mean, the stoke level is just like next level. So there's one state and national park just right on the outside of Ocean City called Assateague Island, and it is probably one of the most majestic looking places. There's wild horses on the beach. I always kind of reference Wedding Crashers. That's pretty much where all of it is shot. So nice. The vibe's always really mellow. I think because people are just really stoked to just actually have waves. So I try to bring that same kind of stoke aloha spirit to the West Coast, because surfing, Southern California, everyone's like, oh, it's crap, and I'm like, it's 3 to 4 and it's consistent. Like, so
we got so spoiled. I am so spoiled in Santa Cruz right now. It's macking. It's 6 to 10 foot faces.
Yeah,
it is firing right now. It just shows my commitment to you on this episode here, because tide is dropping. It's going to be a minus by 7:20 this evening, and it wasn't all that high. And although the water quality leaves something to be desired, it's cleaning up every hour, but it is just firing. And I got to say, Santa Cruz, Huntington has Surf City with the court battle and all that. They got it, but that's fine. We're like Surf USA here, because
honestly, it's
with the exception, the good thing is that the water temp stays so cold that most people don't want to be here, which is awesome.
True. That's true. Yeah.
Because you can keep Huntington. I don't know what it is, but every time I come to Huntington, it's all blown out. It's crap. It's just like, are you kidding me? This is where you want the US Open? I just scratch my head every year. But okay, we're just having too much fun with this conversation. There's no need to do any official intros, but Tracy, I want to know, first of all, I was blown away that you're a certified strength conditioning specialist and connected with USA Surfing, because of course my head goes back to the days of Spicoli and Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and maybe even later than that with Keanu Reeves at Point Break. But you don't, up until this point, I'll grant you, like the last decade, we're seeing a lot more commitment, a lot more focus, a lot more cleaner living in the surf community, especially the top pros in the WSL and now the Olympics. How did you get going with USA Surfing? Obviously, you're a surfer and you're CSCS. So I'm, first of all, very jealous that you've blended two passions together, because I've done it a little myself, but not to the extent you have. So take it away. Where did you come from? What's going on?
Oh, I appreciate that. It's, I think coming from the East Coast roots, being in Ocean City, after I finished college, undergrad was graduate exercise science, kinesiology, but I always kind of just had that vision during my undergrad that I wanted to work with professional surfing. And, that wasn't really the environment that I was brought up in. My parents weren't surfers, but we had my grandfather was a waterman. So, when it came to like the boating, the waterman lifestyle, I was always just getting thrashed around in Ocean City. But I grew up, playing lots of sports, soccer, and then competitively as a dancer. So really understanding from a movement and flow and athleticism that your undergrad in kinesiology really, starts to have you start applying, well, where do you want to be? And, it was always a challenge to know that when you finish your undergrad in kinesiology, there's still not a lot of opportunities just to even be, and also they're not very high paying jobs either. And I think what gets people into the field of kinesiology is the love of helping others and understanding the sport and the science. So you do it more from the passion standpoint of helping individuals, really getting into the science of how to make people better. So that was kind of the launch pad when I realized that I come from a small beach town. There's not a lot of opportunities in surfing. So it was like, back then I still have all like the Trans World magazines and the surfing magazines, and just really thinking, well, how do I apply this sports science approach? And it was like, I got to get to California. So when I moved out to California, now this is doing some years. So it's been end of 2008. I actually moved out to California, and my parents were like, okay, you know what? Like, you're going to chase the surf industry. So you know what? Do it. And, I think there's a lot of luck and timing, that the right place of the sports maturity as well. So, as I started working as a trainer, I was like, okay, get your CSCS. Like, that's really what you have to do. And while I completed my CSCS, I was then also going through my trainer education through Equinox. And that was like my first job getting established in LA. And it was one of the instructors for the tier 3, tier 4. And I said, look, I want to be with professional surfers. Like, I get this business model. I see where I'm at. This is great. But what next? He said, do your master's. So I said, okay, gonna do my master's. So, and when I was going through the process of looking at the education pathways, was whether it's a comprehensive exam or a thesis route. And I was advised, do your thesis. Do something that's going to then actually apply to the sport, so that then when you're done school, you actually have a finished product instead of just passing and taking an exam.
Total sense. That makes complete sense.
So started my master's Long Beach State, no better place to then be at a place called the beach. So
Heck
that
yeah.
was, and when I applied, it was, with the stance that I was going to apply something towards action sports.
Okay, so
And
time out. What's your home break if you're going to CSU LB? Is it Huntington? Are you taking off the north side, south
I'm
side of the
trying to
pier?
think what I was doing back then.
Tulsa,
I think
Chica, Golden West, that whole
no, I
strip,
think
or
then I will say I was actually so when I was doing my thesis, which had me then between Costa Mesa and San Clemente. So I was
that's
actually
awesome.
staying with a college, with a classmate 4 days a week, because then when I actually then got the whole thesis route together, my research study was with our junior competitive surfers. And so that was really the big kicker that got me into them with USA Surfing. So my
I love
coworker,
that you had to go and surf as part of your research project.
well, I mean, when I had mostly afternoon and evening classes, it was really easy for me to then, go and surf and just, you know, use that as my mental frame as well, just to kind of buckle down when it came to my entire living room floor covered in research papers. And, back then, not everything was extremely digital, but it was still, how do I highlight and compose, you know, all the literature that is not only just in athletic performance in juniors, but what was actually existing in surfing at that time. And there really was not a lot of research.
There
There were,
was one piece of crap book, as I recall, called Fit to Surf. It's still like I've got it, and only because I have a table with one leg shorter than the other. I found a perfect use for that piece of crap. So thank God you came along and
no.
stood up and carried over that.
No. So, I think from an athletic performance component, it was how do we actually test these athletes and compare them to other sports and the athleticism of the junior athletes. So that was the entry with USA Surfing. And the medical director, Kevin Dean, he was pretty much starting with USA Surfing. So when I got connected to him, this was then really applying then S&C principles. So once the research then was completed, we tested lower body power, vertical jump, core strength, core endurance, and then implemented an 8-week training CSCS, kind of not to say periodization, but at least at that time a preseason transition training protocol for these athletes. So 8-week training study, and then post-tested them and had significant outcomes in athletic performance. And that was really the greatest thing that I could say upon completing my master's, was that here then was published research that I could then use from a methodology standpoint of why we need to approach the surfing industry and the athleticism of surfing no different than how many other sports that have had years and years of research that have now quantified athletic performance to give us now our baseline.
Okay, there's so much to unpack there. I would love to take some time here. First of all, what other sports did you find carried over or were similar in physical demand as surfing is? I can imagine swimming to some degree, but not completely. But what did you find?
So actually what was really incredible was that the athletes, from lower body power, vertical jump, just as comparable to the high school elite athletes of basketball, soccer, and golf. So, and tennis, baseball from a core strength, from medicine ball toss, we were able, and they were just as athletic in those distances of throws as well. So that was, from a rotational sport core strength, we were actually more concerned about what is necessary for surfing maneuvering, not paddling and endurance, because when you're at that elite level, you already have the endurance. Yes, big wave surfing, different situation, but in the competition environment, how are we truly able to now quantify what's happening and from an athleticism standpoint that these athletes need to maneuver a surfboard?
Especially if they're getting jet ski rides back to the lineup these
Yeah,
days.
no,
I mean, what the
that's
heck?
the
That
assist.
should be illegal, I think. But that's getting into the competition side. I want to stay with the strength conditioning. So tell me the different types of assessments that you did. You already mentioned medicine ball toss for rotational power. What did you do for lower body power, upper body power, upper body endurance?
So for lower body power was vertical jump. And then we also then used, from a core strength standpoint, we actually did a seated rotation toss, a seated rotation where we attached an accelerometer onto a weight and then had one of the tendo units as well. So we could actually measure speed and velocity through the rotation phase from a seated standpoint. And we wanted to actually limit how much the hips were going to then be assisting, even though the core technically is shoulders to the knees. So much can play into that factor, but that's why we wanted to look at vertical jump solely for lower body power. The medicine ball toss was on one knee. They weren't allowed a hip hinge. They actually had to stay pretty stable through that single knee. Then we did a rotational flexibility, which was we had found that there really wasn't significant differences in the core training program that applied to the rotational flexibility, but it was really from a standing position, touch down to the ground, and you had to actually rotate to touch an X, both situations. So more from a transverse rotation, and that's it was mainly a timed. And then the last test was core endurance, which was a plank. So.
And then with that rotation, I'm curious, did goofy foot and regular foot come into play to show asymmetries, or were they fairly symmetric no matter which stance they opted toward?
So when we looked at the differences between right and left, we actually didn't take surf stance into dominance when we were looking at the cohort. So we didn't want that to actually then limit our sample size based upon that actually being determined whether or not someone was actually going to be stronger on their dominant side or not, because not necessarily everyone is always dominant, but based upon their stance, going to have that same strength versus asymmetry. So that was a big challenge for us to really determine, do we want to include surf stance or not? Or do we want to actually, because they're still youth development and junior athletes, how can we prevent a greater asymmetry? So we wanted to decrease that by improving the strength on both sides.
Wow, very cool. And what were your conclusions ultimately?
Ultimately, lower body power, core strength, or I should say lower body strength, core strength, core endurance were all significant effect size based upon the 8-week training program that we implemented. So everyone had the same training program, 8 weeks, 2 days a week. And it was pretty much a 2-week progression from a microcycle standpoint. And we wanted to just allow proper foundational movements. So we really weren't trying to over exemplify the unstable training. And that was a big finding as well, was that these athletes need to really start doing more ground-based movement, foundation movement, because they're always on an unstable surface. And when you look at the research, any test that now is completed on an unstable surface, you have a decreased amount of force output. So why are trainers, or why is there this still? And it's still happening today.
Stupid human tricks. That's all they are. Stupid human tricks, like the Letterman, the Late Show. Of course, yeah. Standing on a ball, standing on the domes, all those things. Now I can understand if you're not looking for power output, if you're just looking for ample coordination, balance, and things of that nature, those tools come in handy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But okay, I had something in my head here. Oh, the control group. So I'm curious, because we're talking junior athletes, we're talking a developing body with testosterone levels naturally increasing. So like there's been studies with prepubescent strength training through the NSSA, and what they did find was that both the trained and untrained control group, so to speak, increased with their strength gains almost relatively the same, primarily due to puberty and the development of the body. But you're talking slightly later, we're talking probably 16 to 19-year-olds age group, right? Did you find something of the same with the control group, or was it just obvious they've reached their kind of hormonal peak and it was the training that sent them over the top?
So great question. And this is why it didn't go into the abstract was actually published in JSCR, but why it was not accepted into the full JSCR publication was because there was not one control group. So sample size was 18 athletes. So ultimately, what was awesome was that it was accepted from an abstract standpoint for that publication. And then once we looked at other variables for supplement research, to be honest, it wasn't worth to then have 9 versus 9 from a sample group at that time.
Too small, way too small.
It really was. You know, the fact that we had 19 athletes still complete the study, I think was more so the more important factor of setting the baseline, more so than a true controlled versus non-controlled group, but absolutely valid in that component. And that's why an 8-week training study, you know, we didn't want to do 6 weeks because that would be still adaptations. But because the effect sizes were so large from those post-training outcomes, I felt confident that the training program in itself was actually applying some ground reaction forces and force output for these athletes.
Okay, and then you finish this thesis, you get your master's, you are on the road. but how do you connect with USA Surfing? How do you secure the role of, well, you're a sports scientist, but first of all, what's your official role with USA Surfing? And then how did you get to be there?
So my role is I'm the director of high performance and analytics. And so that was my co-author was Kevin Dean for the research study. So I'll continue to keep that connection in line. And when the Olympics were announced as a new program in the Olympic venue, that was in 2016. When the Olympic Committee and USA Surfing were building their high performance team, Kevin Dean was appointed as the medical director. And I continue to publish more research off of this original thesis that was then published again in April of 2018. So that was also another kind of leg up for me. And Kevin got the call, called me up. I got the message actually while I was in Bali, my last day. And it said, hey, great news. I want you on my high performance team. And it was kind of that first big dream. So I was really stoked. And, it's a lot of volunteering, and that was part of the master's is that there's a lot of volunteering through all of this that, for governing bodies, nonprofit organizations, you really have to devote that time and really do it for the love and the passion more so than anything else.
Hey, podcast listeners. I want to let you know I will be on the East Coast this January to teach 2 courses of anatomy and motion. The first course is on Saturday, January 21st at the Perform Better Functional Training Institute in West Warwick, Rhode Island. It is a full day of understanding closed-chain biomechanics of the lower body. Following that, I will be in the South Boston area of Hingham, Massachusetts to teach a 2-day course all about upper body biomechanics as it relates to the gait cycle. So if you keep scratching your head about your clients or athletes' recurring pain symptoms, it could be a matter of compensatory patterns. Once you get an understanding of how the body is supposed to move, you can compare it to how your athlete moves. Notice the difference, what's missing, and then have a better idea of what to do about it. To register for one or both courses, go online to my website, rockysnyder.com. Click on Courses and Workshops at the top of the page and hit the register button. This information has truly been game-changing for me, and not just me, for many of the Zealous podcast guests as well. So I hope to see you this January in Rhode Island as well as Massachusetts. And so on your daily kind of task here in your career, what does it look like to be Director of High Performance and Analytics for USA Surfing? What does that entail?
Right. So it's really staying current with all kind of, my job is really from like a resource standpoint. So for the Olympics, it was how do we prepare athletes to have every resource that could possibly help give them that last 1% performance increase. So it's vetting technologies, learning what research is coming out. It's really kind of going through the gamut of what is out there currently from a technology standpoint, innovation, how do we stay current, pretty much building the relationship as well with the athletes and their support staff, and being kind of that key knowledge that when they have questions on some of the technology that they may be using or how to enhance from a nutrition or dietaries component, who can you then refer them to? And the Olympic Committee's got great resources through all that, but it's really keeping everything from a true connector standpoint so that there is an organization component as well when it comes to keeping resources in line for optimal performance.
Now, the difference with surfing compared to, say, Olympic golf, basketball, track and field is that those athletes are on a very consistent environment, where surfing is obviously weather dependent, tide dependent. And as surfers, we're always looking at what the forecast is going to be like. And we can go on to plenty of internet sites these days and get wave cams to see what it's doing and get a little bit more insight. But I imagine, well, you had 4 athletes. You had Caroline Marks, you had Carissa Moore, who took home gold, John Florence, and Kaloe Andino, right? So do you go up to those athletes and give them the breakdown for, first of all, got to say the surf conditions were not the best they could be, right? There was a couple days where
Well,
they weren't bad.
you know what? I will say this. If
You're
the
from Ocean City, Maryland. Hold on. You're tainted by your view right now.
So I think there was a major silver lining that, COVID had brought with the delay of the Olympics from 2020 to 2021, and that if you had looked at the conditions of the waves over 2020 during surfing's waiting period, it was flat.
Oh,
literally flat, like nothing. So when there was then a typhoon, or pretty much we had a monsoon coming through, where all the other sports were worried about being rained on,
we're stoked.
We were over the moon. And it truly showed the athleticism for how big and how, there was one time someone was like, do we get a jet ski assist on this? Because the paddle out at that beach break in Chiba was next level. So the athleticism it truly then showed what was necessary for these athletes to actually have. And Carissa's final, for those that haven't seen it, Duke was shining down, a rainbow appeared, and I still get chills thinking about it. But the men gave it such a great go, and unfortunately, Kolohe and John had to go up against each other. But in the days leading up, we had arrived about a week in advance for not only just our training camp and quarantine and acclimation time period. We were fortunate enough to be further south in a town called Makinahara, which is where one of the wave pools are. So the athletes could actually acclimate, start getting training, get their reps in, and that helped just that acclimation standpoint. But I will say the surfers, we were on those calls with Surfline and the forecasters, and they already have strong relationships. So it's important that, again, my job is to just always be kind of that 3 steps ahead, but they know what works best for them. And they have such dialed regimens, but there's always just that one little missing kind of key little critical component that they may not always know. So it's nice to be able to provide that extra intel or explain some of the science behind why jet lag is extremely fatiguing and what happens on day 3, day 4 from a heat and humidity protocol standpoint, where the heat index was 95, 98 in Japan when we were there. So ice baths, and here I'm with some of our staff and we're lugging the ice into the pools and dropping. So, it takes a village, and everyone was just making sure that the timing of the meals. But when that forecast was being shown, I just remember Kolohe being on one of the calls, and everyone's, we're all like huddled together and we're listening and we're watching the storm track between the 2 models. So that was really exciting. And the fact that it was not flat was probably the best first debut we could have for surfing.
Yeah, truly. No, there were some great waves. I do recall a couple of the heats just being completely blown out and not the most ideal, but Carissa's waves were remarkable. She just, like you say, Duke was shining down, and that's phenomenal. I'm curious with that team, and we don't have to go into individual desires or opinions or anything, but with that team, they're all coming from different places with different sponsors and different equipment. Compare again to a typical Olympic sport where you have a regular kind of, like, there's a certain dimension to the basketball, there's a certain weight and size to a golf ball and a discus and a shot put and all those things. But when it comes to board shape and dimensions, they're within certain parameters, but within those parameters, there's so much variation. And the same for wetsuits and the flexibility those suits provide and all of the equipment. How do you address the variation there? Is it something that you're going, well, we'll just do whatever they bring our way, or do you make recommendations on that as well?
Again, they are so dialed from an equipment standpoint, and that's really where our head coach Brett Simpson, was also helping advise the equipment choices. So our board locker room, it was pretty awesome, and we had a gym as well, and you see all the boards lined up and you're just thinking, everyone probably had I would say a good 8 to 12 boards given the conditions, because it was looking pretty much the week before we left. We could kind of see that there was going to be some storm activity. So it was starting to be advised, bring a little bit bigger board. Don't bring just your gravel board, because you actually are going to have we could have a storm. So Brett was great, and I think a lot of, again, my role is to ensure that that is happening. The head coach is doing what the head coach is supposed to. The nutritionist or the dietary components are being communicated to our chefs, and that factor. From a medical, making sure that when the athlete is needing to be scheduled with either, manual therapy or rehab or recovery, and being that point of contact. So a lot of times I feel like my role is always just connecting and just being that constant swivel, but it's a common state of flow, so that every athlete feels that they have what they need. They're not waiting. And that's what's most important, because sometimes when as surfers and we're waiting for that contest and we don't know when it's going to run, there's so many other variables that are out of our control. How do we then stay in control of what we can? And that's where, playing ping pong, playing games, puzzles, we weren't sure if we were going to have the contest run on day one, and thankfully we did. So there wasn't any cabin fever. But again, our kickoff quarantine training camp was such a great morale for everyone to really bond, and to also surf a pool. They were stoked on that, and just really coming back. John and Chloe both were coming off of big injuries, so it was making sure that the recovery time from flight, was really having just a nice cadence, so that then they could peak at the appropriate time.
And so I imagine there must have been a sense of overwhelming awe for the surfers on the team to come in and to be having this this professional entourage of a nutritional coach or a team dietitian, you as the sports scientist and director of high performance, who's coordinating with the head coach, who's coordinating with the PT or the athletic trainer, all of this whole team approach, because you typically don't find that on the tour quite like that. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. I think it's from an education standpoint and just really being a source of knowledge. And I think all these athletes are at that next level, that their sponsors, and for as many years as they have been doing all the contests that they have been, they've learned a lot and they know their bodies extremely well. So it's really, the Olympic Committee is always kind of like, don't change what's already working, and that's really where, when everything is already pieced and dialed. But it is such a really gratifying when you can inform them of that one little piece of knowledge where they're like, oh, that makes sense. And you're thinking, oh, well, yeah, right. So, you want to have those healthy conversations, and just, it really creates then a next level of resourcefulness that you can be for those athletes.
Very cool. Okay, I got to ask just a brief non sequitur. That barrel that's behind you, is that pipe? What is that?
That's
or back tour? It wouldn't be. That's a right.
All I know, it's called the Green Room. An old client. It was a nice gift that was given to me, and I guess I can kind of crouch into it at times.
That's it. You're in it. Brilliant. Okay, so how about this? Pre-surf warm-up routine. What does an Olympic surfer do to prep for paddling out? Because there's a whole bunch. You go down to the beach and you'll see it, old fat guys in rubber just bending over or bending backwards. But then you've got some people doing a little sun salutation. But what did the U.S. Olympians do as a form of warm-up?
Yeah, there was a lot of kind of prehab exercises, a lot of band work. I think for those athletes that were coming off some injuries, just getting the activation through the hips, glute activation, then all the way down to ankle mobility. So from bottom of the chain working up, every athlete has their own regimen, I think, which was also really cool. But to then from a activation, coordination standpoint. Some athletes just wanted a couple, ball tosses or a couple banded work, just assisted in that component. When they were foam rolling before we would even leave, I mean, that's the thing, is that at the beach during our pre-training camp, everything had to be like blocked off just because of Japan's quarantining and COVID restrictions. But we ensured from a hypervolt, we had red light therapy, a lot of mobility ultimately when it came to like before hitting the water. But sometimes they just were just like any other surfer, just ready to jump in and just kind of hustle and go.
And what about fueling? Is that your responsibility, or do you have a nutritionist or dietitian?
So currently, that resource is usually through the Olympic Committee.
Okay.
But what I tend to do is either outsource that for the athletes. But I think within exercise science, I think there's a lot of proper tools or proper fuels that a lot of athletes kind of go to. We had a massive stock of Go macros. I'm not gonna lie, those were kind of the best kind of bars for these athletes. We probably went through so much of that, but in addition to that was also hydration, ensuring that the proper electrolytes. So a big thing for these athletes is ensuring that because of drug testing, USADA and anti-doping, is that all the products that they are consuming are at least third-party certified or NSF certified, and making sure that they know that their supplements are clean. And these athletes do. But it's ensuring that, from caffeine levels, hydration levels, that we are really monitoring, really color of urine, especially during travel. I think that's the biggest conversation that I will always have when it comes to heat humidity protocols, especially after a flight, and making sure that replenishing and making sure that it is healthy to sweat. And if we're not sweating, if you're not thirsty, then, we need to be 3 steps ahead again.
Yeah, we've always had kind of a P chart in our restroom here at our facility that just, and it's just people really appreciate it, going, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it. I guess I need to get a glass of water. I had no idea the color. So, okay, USA Surfing has a relationship with the National Scholastic Surfing Association. We know it to be NSSA. In fact, I know at least 2 of the Olympians went through the NSSA, but I imagine all 4 of them did, didn't they?
John and Carissa from Hawaii, they went through the HSA, which kind of, filters in through from the contest standpoint. So I think, now over all these years, a lot of the athletes, and especially once they qualify through those top rankings, and they come into USA Surfing for at least championships at lower trestles. So that's where Hawaii is now really starting to filter and really bring it together. And I think years prior, like 10, 15, 20 years ago, that was, NSSA, and, I think that's where HSA, I don't want to get into it, but, there's always a pipeline that's filtering in. So
yeah, I mean, we've got other organizations like Western Surfing Association, WSA, but it doesn't have that streamline entry, like qualifying, like NSSA does. So I guess I'm leading into up and coming. First of all, little caveat on the side, you referred to these surfers as athletes, which is a just refreshing, wonderful kind of heartfelt acknowledgement that, yeah, surfers are athletes through and through. You try and paddle out even 100 yards to the lineup and see how you're doing if you've never done it before. And then try and time it right so you can stand up on a board and that is completely unstable. And to make it look easy, well, that's just a completely different level entirely. And that requires athleticism for sure. So these athletes truly are athletes. They just happen to be riding solar energy that's transformed into liquid. We won't have to get too deep into that. But how about the up and coming? Like, are you working with obviously you did your master's with the youth population, but do you still maintain that? Obviously we're in between Olympics right now. So what's your role look like right now?
Yeah, it's really exciting to see the junior development pipeline. Honestly, every year when USA Surfing runs their prime events, and the athleticism, even from the athletes that are the U12 to then U18. I mean, the broad has just grown, and I think even to see the women and the young women and where that athleticism has come from has been absolutely extraordinary. And I thoroughly enjoy going to our primes and then our USA Championships, which is in the mid to end of June at Lower Trestles. So that's always really exciting from team selection standpoint for USA Surfing. And then also just watching how the sport continues to grow. And absolutely. So whether it's filming project, going to wave pool training camps, really advising, finding, what can help coaches as well, and what training programs these athletes can then get into to prevent all those lower chain injuries that we are seeing that have been so redundant, from the ankle to the knee hip. I mean, yes, overuse in the shoulders, but we're seeing way too many injuries in the lower body from landing mechanics. And a lot of that can be fixed on land. So that's a big portion of my work as well, and really why my original research was wanting to quantify athletic performance on land. Because if we are training them so poorly on land, we're of course going to see even more injuries happen in the water. And really the job is to decrease the risk of injury right now. And so that's through education, through also exercise modalities, other ways that we can actually really help those athletes stay healthy from, a next level standpoint.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I couldn't agree more. And because basically, if you don't have the basic functional mechanics on land, how can you expect anywhere else? So, and you brought up COVID too, because the delay in the Olympics, but that was a silver lining, not only because it was flat in 2020 and then monsoon typhoon season occurred for the Olympic time, but I'm just thinking of the youth, and I can only speak for the youth in Santa Cruz because I was directly affected, related, and connected with them. Because when COVID shut down everything around, national and state parks and everywhere else, even in Southern California, your beaches closed down. Santa Cruz, there was only one weekend, I believe, if I think right, I think there were only 2 days where you couldn't go out onto the water, and they were crap and flat anyway, so it didn't really matter. But then we could actually access the waves, we just couldn't stand on the sand. If you were going to walk from the sidewalk out to the water, that's fine, you just couldn't linger. Yeah. Well, I bring that up because what we're seeing here in Santa Cruz, at least, is we're seeing an amazing generation of advanced young surfers, to the likes of which we probably haven't seen for 15 to 20 years. And I think primarily it was because they couldn't go to school, they were all homeschooled, and therefore they had more access to surfing. And I can speak for my own kid, where his level of surfability skyrocketed in those 2 years, to the point where I'm watching these kids now, and a lot of them are qualifying for the USA Surfing. Yeah. They went through NSSA.
There are a couple Santa Cruz kids that honestly, it's been really cool watching, and they're now probably 14. And I remember when they were 12 or 10, I'm thinking, these
rippers.
These rip.
So, you watch out for Max. You watch out for Brody and Max and James. There's a whole bunch of those kids that are coming down there, and they are going to, Maddie, who was just in the Coldwater Classic here, and she did great. Yep. She's on our high school surf team, and my son as well, though he has an affinity for longboarding, although we both shortboard. There's something about, well, you have that dance background, so you can understand it, although you're a shortboarder by heart, it seems. Yeah. But and we won't talk about the fact that there's no longboarding in Olympics. We can save that for another discussion.
But they are in the Pan American Games, which is really
yes,
exciting.
They are. And we went down and tried to do a qualifying round there with you guys, and that was wonderful. So the opportunities abound for the youth in surfing and advancing on. But what about the Paralympics? I'm curious, are you joined in with USA Surfing and the Paralympians? We've got a lot of adaptive surfers here in Santa Cruz, and I'm wondering if that is part of your position too.
USA Surfing and the Paralympic team just brought home gold, which was at Pisno Beach, and bravo to them. It was absolutely amazing and absolutely inspiring. And there's been a lot of conversations that it should be within the Paralympic program. And I think there is the opportunity that it will have an exhibition. I don't want to speak wrong, but it is absolutely amazing and incredible. And just to see that level of athleticism from a Paralympic standpoint, it is phenomenal and absolutely necessary that it should be. And I think the right time, it's here ultimately. So I feel really confident that that's part of from a support level and just right time, and it will get there.
So Tracy, what excites you? What gets you going with your career and everything? I mean, I can feel your passion, I can feel your energy, but specifically, what is it when you get out of bed, you're like, oh yeah, I get to do this or that today, or I'm looking forward to this coming next year or whatever.
Yeah, I think, and this may sound so surfer cliche, is that there's always constant change, right? And so knowing that the sport continues to grow, and I've been very lucky to be kind of the right place, the right time of the maturity of the sport, is being also that voice and leader to help these athletes be prepared for that next level, and really providing the intel and innovation and technology that continues to grow in the sport. And some of the projects that I get to be working on right now, it's kind of mind blowing when I think from a tech and innovation, like what is next level. And so that truly excites me. I think I'll send you a link of a grassroots project that started. So we'll talk another time about that next project, but it's been really exciting from a quantification and biomechanics standpoint, that, the sport in itself is not only just truly athletic, but the beauty that the ocean provides. It's like seeing the waves today. I mean, it's kind of like, how can you not enjoy this sport? How can you not want to have that kind of culture aspect that this, beautiful sport that displays, also, from an equal standpoint, what WSL has provided for the women in equal pay. I think it's a big
Yeah.
thing that the women in the industry are really getting the platform to be competing at the same venue, and well deserving so, and to have that equal playing field for these athletes. I think is absolutely tremendous, and it's taken some time, and it's there. And I think that's where, what some of these Olympians have also been able to understand is that surfing is much bigger now, and it has its global outreach, and the fan base is growing. I think once people really understand is that we do truly care about our playing field, and that the rest of the world needs to also care about what that impact has on this playing field and the ocean and the environment and that impact. I think, everyone does their part as surfers, but I think it can transcend to more as well.
Well, I think what also might transcend are the wave pool surfers, because they're popping up in places, of course, like Waco, Texas. And well, we've got Lemoore. I'm sure you've been to Kelly's Ranch down outside of Fresno there. And they're popping up all over the place. And so now we're getting youth or kids, especially I'll say, but adults too, but mainly the kids are able to have like memberships as if it was a health club to a wave pool. And so they get to practice. The only kind of carryover they don't get is the understanding of true watermanship when it comes to
100%.
how to behave out in the ocean, what to look for, where the lineup is, where are the rips, and so on. And so it's going to be interesting to see if we're going to get some up and coming potential champions from wave pool, and how it carries over into the real ocean waves, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think, where I start to kind of nerd out in the aspect of wave pools is having a standardized playing field. How do we then quantify that athletic performance standpoint? So one project, it's when we actually know how to measure that component of the wave and the size and what that set is going to provide us, we can then start to quantify the athletic performance of the athlete. How high, how far, what's their trajectory, or how much or how fast, what's their torque. So I think, from a science standpoint, wave pools absolutely bring that standardization for us, and from a training and rep standpoints, where that can then translate into the ocean for the higher progression and innovation of these athletes.
Yeah, I agree. From a scientific research perspective, the wave pool is going to be just a phenomenal place to acquire information. From a competitive, like surf competition standpoint, I would prefer it to stay in the ocean primarily, because there is that other element we have to address. And I think that makes you an overall complete water person and an overall athlete. But, we're going to see them on both. It's just, I guess the purist in me is coming out right now. Tracy, this has been phenomenal. I could talk, obviously we could chat till the cows come home about surf and strength conditioning, because they're two of our passions we share. But if people want to find out more about you, USA Surfing and so on, I'll put these descriptions below in the descriptions. That is, I'll put the links, but where do they go?
Yeah, USA Surfing has an Instagram. It's USA Surfing. My handle is Traxel, Tracy Axel, and so LinkedIn, email. These discussions are so invigorating, and it's really awesome to be able to connect with you. And then, I think people are so curious about that next level of this sport and where it's going and the innovation and what can happen. So.
And just one last thing, though, I'm curious with the WSL, we didn't even bring that up. How is USA Surfing? Is there a connection between the WSL and USA Surfing, or do they stay separate?
Yeah, no, I think there's been a lot of conversations and, working together to ensure that, from an athlete health and safety, from the calendar year, what's going to happen, there's always those communications. I mean, I personally have, some great contacts and love kind of chit-chatting in the water because, their headquarters is right down the street from me. So there's always kind of that great working relationship as well.
And then final ones here, when are you coming up to Santa Cruz next?
So we have a prime contest, January 8th, 9th. I'm hoping I can get on that trip. So I was there last year when there was that tsunami.
Oh, that was awesome.
Harbor.
We were on the east side of town because we were supposed to have a high school contest at that time.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And then right around 7:30 or so,
yep,
the girls' longboard division went out. And the next thing you know, where did they go? Oh, they had been swept around. And then the next thing you know, they swept back. It was crazy. So yeah, you guys,
that was my first experience up at Santa Cruz. And so hopefully I'll get on.
Well, we wanted to welcome you proper with the tsunami. That's it.
It was awesome.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Really, really epic. So hopefully that junior prime, I'll get on that one at the start of the new year. So.
And then just to prove how hardcore surfers are, you just delayed it a day. You stayed up and you're like, well, tsunami's not going to get in our way. We're just going to go out on Sunday and Monday. And the kids get to take the day off for all the little ones that are still competing. Oh, no, that was great. And you had good conditions too.
We did. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And the parents, I think what was so great was the parents, really understood, this was out of our control, like natural disaster. This is part of our sport, and when the city and the lifeguard patrol, you gotta follow the rules. So we had to that day. So
yeah, I was one of those parents where I'm just going, really? You want to stop? Come on. These kids are going to love the experience. One day they'll be like, oh yeah, we had a contest and the tsunami appeared, but we kept on going.
Yep.
So I didn't get my way. Oh well. So the coach had to go home. Anyway, when you come up in January, let's try and connect. I got a full quiver and you can just pick whatever you need if you don't bring your own board. Thank you so much for being on. This has been a dream.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Zealous Podcast, man. That was so much fun. I could have gone on for so much more. In fact, next time when I have Tracy on the show, maybe we'll do the podcast while we're sitting on our boards catching waves. That would be kind of unique. In the meantime, I want to thank Tracy for coming on and USA Surfing for that matter. But don't forget, next month, January 21st, I'll be at the Perform Better Functional Training Institute teaching a one-day course all about lower body biomechanics as it relates to the closed chain, or the most common functional movement pattern we have, walking, our gait pattern. And then from there, right after, on the 22nd, 23rd, I'll be up in Hingham, Massachusetts, just near the Cape, and teaching an upper body course along the same lines. What does the upper body and the spine do when we're in a closed chain environment and gait? So you can go to my website, rockysnyder.com, and register there. Just click on events and follow the lead. You'll get yourself a nice early bird discount for the Perform Better. And while you're there, sign up for the upper body. Until then, we'll see you next week.